My name is Rhonda Williams. I'm the Executive Director of M Seminars, and I'm going to speak today about what you need to know about Canadian visa offices abroad. What's the difference between all of these? Canadian High Commissions, Canadian Embassies, Canadian Consulates General, and Canadian Consulates. They're very distinct, and although some of them have similar purposes, they all are different in terms of the world of diplomacy. So Canadian High Commissions are they're all in countries that are also members of the Commonwealth. Canada is a member of the Commonwealth, and the other countries where we have high commissions are members of the Commonwealth. Commonwealth members are typically countries that are former colonies of Great Britain. So there are 53 nations in the Commonwealth at the present time. The Commonwealth undertakes a variety of different topics that they deal with. Sometimes countries fall into and out of membership in the Commonwealth. For example, during the apartheid years, South Africa was not a member of the Commonwealth. They were basically excluded from the Commonwealth because of their policies with regard to apartheid. So abroad, all of their high commissions suddenly became embassies. And later, when they abolished apartheid and they wanted to rejoin some of the organizations that they'd been members of internationally previously, they were allowed to rejoin the Commonwealth, and their embassies suddenly became high commissions again. As you can imagine, that was a little chaotic. They had to do a lot of changing things, such as their signs out at the front of their missions, all of their letterhead, every kind of documentation that they had in the High Commission had to be changed, or in the embassy had to be changed into High Commission things. So it was, that's just a very small example. They were also then allowed to rejoin meetings of the Commonwealth and participate in all the activities of the Commonwealth. So it was quite a big deal. So it does happen that member countries are in the Commonwealth, out of the Commonwealth, and back in the Commonwealth. And those who are in the Commonwealth typically like it and prefer to be in the Commonwealth and do what they can to rejoin the Commonwealth when they're able to do so. So high commissions are almost always located in the host nation's capital city. For example, Canada has a high commission in India, and India has a high commission in Canada. In India, the Canadian High Commission is located in New Delhi, and for India, their High Commission is located in Ottawa. Both countries are members of the Commonwealth. Canadian embassies are Canadian posts abroad in non-Commonwealth countries such as France, the United States, and China. So these countries are typically not former British colonies, although they might have been at one time. For example, the United States was a colony of Great Britain at one time, but they are not a member of the Commonwealth. They are not going to be, as far as I can tell, anytime soon, a member of the Commonwealth. So in those countries, Canada has embassies, and the other country also has embassies. So Canada has an embassy in Washington, D.C., and the United States has an embassy in Ottawa. So embassies are almost always located in the host nation's capital city, although at this very moment you can see that there's been a bit of to do in Israel with the United States and their decisions with regard to where their embassy is located there. Consulate generals are located in a major city in the host nation that is not the national capital. And consulates general usually provide a full range of services. New York City and Sao Paulo are two examples where Canada has consulate generals. The consulates general may have a specific purpose, such as being a trade office. For example, when Canada began to establish independent relationships with Taiwan, we opened a trade office in Taipei. So since there was some sensitivity with regard to any kind of recognition of Taiwan as an independent nation, we were sensitive to that. And Canada just opened a trade office with an education office attached to it in Taipei. It was quite a move on our part, a little bit of a bold move to offer this recognition to Taiwan at that time, which was in the very early 90s, because of China's claim to Taiwan as part of the nation of China. So there is a great deal of diplomatic sensitivity around the issue sometimes. You may have read recently about some countries' airlines are now including Taipei as part of China at the request of China. So all sorts of things go on. Consulates are also located in major cities, but usually provide a limited range of services. Munich is an example of that, and they may have what we call consular services, which is services to Canadians in distress, but they would not, for example, be normally undertaking any kind of immigration-related services. They may have other functions, such as being an education office, or be located in a city like Bangalore in India because of its importance as an IT center. Canada also has other missions abroad, such as a permanent mission to the UN, which is located in Geneva, and there are other cities where we also have permanent missions. There would also be a mission like this in New York at the United Nations, and various other places in the world we might have specific permanent missions abroad. There are a number of staff designations at Canadian missions abroad. I've ranked them. So we have the Immigration Program Manager, and the Immigration Program Manager, or IPM, is usually at the counselor level or above, and they rank as senior management at the Canadian mission abroad. That would typically be at a mission where there's a substantial Canadian presence. If the mission is very small and has only 3 or 4 staff members, Canadian staff members, which is common in some countries in Africa and some other countries in Asia, we might not have somebody at the counselor level, but maybe a first secretary would be acting as the Immigration Program Manager. So first secretary is usually someone who is on their 3rd or more posting. They're usually quite experienced and they know what they're doing. They don't get a lot of supervision because it's expected that they will understand what they're doing, and they are usually going to be in the position of supervising other Canadian and locally engaged staff members. So the second secretary is usually someone who is on their 1st or 2nd posting. They usually know what they're doing, but they may also be under some supervision from a first secretary or somebody at the consular level. The third secretary is someone who is in the first year of their very first posting. They're on probation for that first year, and they're closely supervised, and they're still learning. So after they've completed that first year and they're finished their probationary period, then they automatically become a second secretary for the remainder of that first posting, if it's another year or up to 3 more years, depending on the hardship level of the posting. The third secretary is not likely to be supervising anyone except for their processing assistant if they have one. So there are a number of additional staff designations at Canadian missions abroad amongst the immigration members. So there's a Canada-based officer, or CBO. This is usually a career visa officer or a person who is seconded from another government department. For example, somebody might be seconded from CBSA for a single posting abroad, or somebody from IRCC or the IAD or the IRB could be posted as a CBO for a single term assignment. But typically the CBO is a career officer who's on multiple postings. The second major designation is locally engaged staff. So we have the Canada-based officers who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents, usually citizens, and they're posted abroad. The locally engaged staff is a person working at a Canadian mission and hired locally. In the visa section, they may work in the registry, in the IT section, as an assistant to a visa officer, and so on. These people could be also Canadian citizens. For anybody who knows Ron McKay, he worked in Japan as a locally engaged staff member, although he was a Canadian citizen. So he was not a career diplomat. He was working as a locally engaged person because he was already living in Japan. Other examples are somebody who is the spouse of a Canadian diplomat, someone who's the spouse of a diplomat of another country who is looking for work. So that would be obviously friendly nations such as Australia, the UK, France, other friendly nations. And they are hired locally to work in our embassy or high commission. So that's locally engaged staff members. There are also temporary duty officers. So in contrast to somebody who's on secondment for a single posting, this is somebody who would be on posting for a very limited period of time, such as 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, something like that. And that's because the visa office is busy. So these temporary duty officers, when we're speaking of them, we speak of them being on TD, temporary duty. So they are either from IRCC headquarters or from the Foreign Affairs headquarters, or they're on secondment from another government department, such as, again, IAD, IRB, CBSA. So they're there to help with a busy tourist season or for processing of a special event. So a special event could be something like the Olympics in Canada. When the Olympics were in Vancouver, there would have been temporary duty officers assigned to various missions abroad to help with processing applications for people who wanted to come for the Olympics. So that would be athletes, their family members, their other staff such as coaches and other staff members that would be accompanying them, or just regular tourists who were interested to come to Canada for the Olympics to just visit and see the Olympics. Some of the temporary duty officers also would be there from other ministries for cross-fertilization, training, or observation. So it could be somebody from IAD, for example, who gets to see how visa processing works on the front line, so that they understand how the selection process works, how refusals are handled, and that kind of thing, so that when they're actually getting cases to consider themselves, they would have an idea of how the visa office would have handled that case. So that's the cross-fertilization training. The observation would be similar. In the same way, visa officers may spend a little time in Canada between their postings doing the same type of thing. For example, they might be observing refugee hearings. When I was between postings one time, I went and sat in on some IAD hearings just so that I would understand how the process works at that stage. So I would have had a very good understanding of how the process worked for selection and consideration at the visa office, but to understand how the process worked at the IAD level was also very useful. So again, that would have been cross-fertilization in terms of observation. So some people are interested to know why things sometimes seem to go crazy at the visa offices and why there's a lot of change in staff and personnel. So the Canadian Foreign Service is rotational. This means that people are, career diplomats are posted abroad for periods of time, and that can range from 2 years to 4 years. And in rotation, they are posted elsewhere, or they come back to Canada for a home posting. This means that there is a great deal of changeover at certain times of the year. Posting season is pretty well defined each year. It's when officers are on the move. It's loosely aligned with the school year in Canada so that children of Canadian diplomats can move during the summer holiday period. This means that any time from the beginning of May until the end of August, any diplomats or any Canadian-based officers who are being cross-posted or who are going back to Canada for a home posting could be on the move, and there will be new people moving into their places. So it means a little bit of a wind down for the people who are leaving the post and a little bit of a learning curve for those who are coming into the post, because there are always visa office specific procedures that are in place. So it's not unusual for processing to slow down a little bit at this time of year as people move into and out of positions. This is also the time of year when a lot of temporary duty officers are in place to help with this transitional period of time, which usually also coincides with the time of year when there may be a lot of study permits being requested because people are getting ready to attend an educational institution in Canada starting in September. What's the best approach to visa offices? I think it's to always be polite. So even if you think something has really gone badly awry with an application, you should not give in to the temptation to vent your frustration in a quick email that may be very emotional and emotive, and you could be very upset. You could think you did everything perfectly, your client is absolutely genuine, and you really can't believe that the visa officer had done something so crazy. Don't give in to that. Wait, perhaps do an ATIP if you have the time to do that. But you never know when you'll be dealing with that visa office or that visa officer again. And believe me, in the visa offices, they do have discussions about the people who are sending in representations on behalf of their clients, especially if it's something that is impolite or has an impolite tone to it. So you want to make sure that you don't get the reputation of being that really highly emotional person who's sending off a quick email in the heat of the moment. So be polite, explain your side of the matter, and follow the process laid out in the Overseas Processing Manual at section 5.39 if you need the matter needs to be taken further. So the process is all very clearly laid out for you, and you need to follow that process, which has various stages that you can go through. So the best approach continued. Visa officers are very busy. They are under a lot of pressure to produce numbers in terms of final dispositions of files. So that final disposition includes approved, refused, or withdrawn. And the visa officers have to be prepared if a file is refused or there's some problem with it. Even if it's approved, there may be other processing that has to go on after that. So as we all know, we can have files approved and then something changes. Our client gets married or has a child, or their passport has expired and they get a new passport. So there could be further processing for the visa office to do in those cases. If the file is refused and then later it's appealed, the visa officer has things to do in that regard. If the file is withdrawn, usually there's not much else that they have to do, but there could be other things that come up. So the visa officers are busy not only considering the files and processing the files, but dealing with the aftermath for approvals, refusals, or withdrawals. So remember that they're very busy and that they're not just waiting around hoping that they'll hear from you with some minor question that you could find out the answer for yourself. So I always try and make it easy for the visa officer to approve my client's file. I try to cover every single aspect of the case in my letter of submission. I always try to address any possible concerns that the visa officer might see, and I don't try to hide anything. I try to explain it or put forward some argument for why there's a problem and how it should be overcome. Also, let the visa office know the very best way to contact you if they really need to do so. These days it's usually by email, but as we know, the visa offices are still asking if we have a fax number, so presumably they could contact us by fax. And I hope that none of you are still using exclusively snail mail or surface mail, because that does usually add a lot of time to your client's file. So if you are following up on something with the visa office, something that they've sent to you, make a reference to it in your correspondence. Make it easy for them to find out that they have sent you something. So I always say something like, this refers to the letter that I received from your office dated XYZ, so that they know exactly where to look. This helps them to remember that they wrote to you, or if somebody else is looking at that file, they'll know that something was sent out from their office. So in posting season, a visa officer may send something out and then they're out of there, they're on to their next posting or home posting. So a new visa officer comes in and they get that file and they get the correspondence from you. If they don't have any reference from you as to what was sent out, it may take them a lot longer to figure out what it was that was sent out on that file and what exactly the visa officer before them was looking for. So make sure that you make it very easy. You give them the reference of what they had asked you for. Questions from the audience? So there's a question online about the United States moving their embassy recently from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the capital of the country. So the reason that most countries have determined to have their embassies in Tel Aviv is because there are claims from a number of different religions regarding Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is claimed as kind of the heart of at least three religions. That would be the Jewish religion, the Christian religion, and the Muslim religion. So if countries had their embassies in Jerusalem, it could create or provoke difficulties for the religions, amongst the religions in Jerusalem. So that's why most countries have decided that Tel Aviv, which is another major city in Israel, would be a better place to locate their embassies until such time as a solution might be found for the claims to Jerusalem by these three religions. And it was considered by most people to be a little bit provocative of the US government to move their embassy to Jerusalem recently. So there are arguments on both sides, and there are certainly arguments on the side of Israel that it it is the capital of the country, and that other countries should have their embassies there. So it shows that there is perhaps a change of relationship between the United States and Israel to make that move. And I guess other countries are not willing at this time to be that provocative and to risk having sensitivities stirred up with the various religions. Hope that answers the question. So I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. And I can't hear anything else. Although I'm seeing a little message saying that Peggy is talking, so I don't hear Peggy. Okay, thanks everyone. So the question is it always reciprocal? Not sure what that is referring to. I am assuming it's always referring to, whether or not, if we have a high commission somewhere and that country has, what do they have in our country? That is reciprocal. Oh, no, the question is the visa exempt between country? No, it's not always reciprocal. So that would be an example of that might be Mexico. A few years ago, Canada imposed a visitor visa requirement on Mexico, but Mexico did not have a visitor visa requirement on Canada. And the same situation was true in France several years ago. So that is not always reciprocal. Why do the Canadian visa offices assign certain countries to deal with other countries for processing? That's with regard to capacity. And some visa offices are not very busy and other visa offices are overly busy. So the overly busy offices would farm out some of their processing to other visa offices, other Canadian visa offices who are less busy. So for example, India, the visa office, I'm just saying an example, it's not necessarily that this is true, but India is a very busy visa office, so they might have some of their processing dealt with by other countries where where it's less busy. So I can't remember some of the countries that were dealing with the Indian processing a few years ago, but you would get strange emails from random countries in Europe or other places in Asia. So it's strictly to do with capacity. Again, the next question is they also assign different ones for TRV and not the same one for PR applications. It would have to do with capacity. So TRV and PRs are usually done by different groups of people. So there are groups of people within the mission that would deal with temporary admission to Canada, and usually a separate group that would deal with permanent applications in Canada. So there may be a lot of capacity to deal with the temporary resident applications, but not as many people at that mission who are able to deal with the PR applications, which are usually more complicated and have more legislative requirements and more references in all the processing manuals. So because of that, the staff members usually have to be better trained and maybe more experienced. Usually when somebody comes to a mission in their early part of their posting, they'll be dealing with applications for temporary admission to Canada, not the permanent admission to Canada. So if there's capacity for dealing with a lot of TRVs and not a lot of PRs, that some of the PR applications could be farmed out to other countries. So the example the questioner is giving is Cambodia, for example, goes to Bangkok or Singapore. So it's usually really a matter of capacity in terms of training and how busy the office is. Something else that's interesting to mention is that just for consular services, which are those services for assistance to Canadians in distress overseas or some other services, Canada has relationships with other countries. We can't afford to have an embassy or a high commission in every single country in the world. And same with other countries. They can't afford to have an embassy or a high commission in every single country of the world. So in that case, we share some of the services that we offer. For example, we have relationships with Australia and other countries, so that if we have an embassy or a high commission there, we would cover off for them, for their nationals who have some kind of distress situation or some other services that are required. And in some countries, Australia has a mission and we don't, so they would in turn serve distressed Canadians or provide some other services related to Canada. So that's, again, only with friendly countries, countries where we have very good relationships, would we enter into that kind of relationship. But we do have a number of those in place around the world. When I was a visa officer in Thailand, we did not have an office in Burma. So when I went to Burma on a visit, doing processing for applications, the Australians had made all the arrangements for my visit. They had provided office space for my visit. They arranged the translator for my visit. And they were very helpful in all of the arrangements for that visit and all of the things that I needed to have right at the time of the interviews that I was doing with applicants. So it was a very good example of the cooperation that existed between Canada and Australia at that time. I'm sure it still exists, but just for me, it was a really good example. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, so I'm not seeing any more questions at this time. So thank you for watching this presentation. I hope to see you again soon at another seminar for IM seminars.